My name is Abigail Robertson, and my student dialogue was about the game of life and exploration of socioeconomic status. I really think that the people who facilitated my dialogue did a great job. They got everyone involved, they were very nice, they definitely seemed easy to talk to, so that really helped while we were doing our dialogue. I do believe that our group achieved a true dialogue. The people who were facilitating it went over the different rules for just respecting other people's opinions and but being honest at the same time. So it was good. A lot of people definitely participated. There were minimal amounts of awkward silences and things like that. But of course, there are always people who participate more than others. There were some people who sat in the room and didn't say anything except for during the icebreaker activity. Um, it was kind of interesting to see because the way we did our icebreaker activity is one person said something about themselves and then somebody else would have to stand up and assert that they agreed. So with that thing, and then they had to say something about themselves. So you kind of had to um, be, you kind of had to go out of your comfort zone and speak up and be a little bit outgoing at that time. And you could tell as we started going around the room, more and more people were standing in the middle, people who had already stood up and spoken, and there were just some people at the end who looked like they did not want to stand up and say anything and looked like they, even though it was inevitable that they were going to have to stand up eventually, they were just waiting until the very last people, until they pretty much had to go. And you could tell that those last few people to participate in the icebreaker were the people who were definitely passive voices throughout the whole dialogue, and people who stood up at the beginning of the icebreaker, or maybe even the person who volunteered to start the icebreaker, were the people who shared more of the opinions and kind of kept the dialogue going because they're more outgoing and willing to voice their opinion. I think I was definitely in the top third for like number of people to stand up for our icebreaker, and I do think that I contributed to the dialogue a lot. I don't have a problem saying what I think, and I don't mind speaking in front of groups of people. So I feel like I benefited more from the dialogue because I definitely um, included my own opinions and participated. Um, One thing that I thought was interesting about our dialogue is another kind of icebreaker activity that we did was the girls would say, stand up if a certain thing applies to you. And it started out as saying, say, stand up if you're from South Carolina, stand up if you are from out of state, just general things to kind of get to know us. But then they started saying things such as, stand up if you have a car. Stand up if you are in a sorority, which I am, so I stood up and they went around and, asked us each which sorority we were in. They said things like, stand up if you have a job, and I do not have a job. Um, but if a good amount of people stood up, she asked them about all their jobs, and then she said, stand up if you have two jobs. And few people even stood up for that, people who had multiple jobs. And then she said, stand up if you get an allowance from your parents. And I do get a monthly allowance from my parents, so I decided to be honest with it. Why not? And I stood up, but it was just interesting because there were about three of us in the large group who did get an allowance. All three of us were the girls who did stand up for, all three of us were girls, first off, and all three of us were people who were in a sorority. Um, and I'm not so sure if there were some other people in that room who were in the same position that I was in, who get an allowance from their parents now that they're in college, but maybe they were ashamed to stand up because I know that made me feel ashamed to stand up. Just the way that it was, just the way that the question was approached because it was asked right after um, there was a question asked about people who work multiple jobs, who put in a lot of work for their money, and then it almost makes me look selfish and lazy when the next thing they ask is who basically is a freeloader and gets money for doing nothing from their parents. And that was just a very interesting way to start out the dialogue and it kind of put it in perspective, and that was an interesting activity because it let us kind of scope out the room and see where everybody stood. Another activity that I really enjoyed was we all stood in line and they would tell us a series of statements, and they would say, like, either take a step to the left if this has ever happened to you, or take a step to the right. And when you were taking a step to the right, it was definitely something that was more, for example, take a step to the right if your parent has ever been laid off. Take a step to the right if you live in a community where there's crime. But say people would take a step to the left if they are in the upper middle class, or they lived in a safe community, or they've been able to go on vacation out of the country, and things like that. And throughout that exercise, people did separate more into groups where people who were maybe more privileged, and then maybe people who have had less privileges during their life. But what was very interesting to see is everybody started out more to the left of where the line originally started. So it's very nice to see that just simply living in America and being able to go to Clemson University, the college that we all go to, that automatically means that most people are privileged and most people have a high socioeconomic status. So that really helped to put it in perspective. I thought that was a great activity that we did. And overall, I thought the dialogue was very effective. It was interesting to me, and I had a good time with it. It definitely made me take a step back and analyze how lucky I am, and all the things that I get in my life. But it was definitely interesting to hear opinions from everybody.